Mm.
All right, our guest today is Shermichael Singleton. He's a political strategist, analyst, and op-ed writer. Shermichael, welcome to the news.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me.
Great to talk with you. We've been Twitter friends for a while.
That's
And
right.
I was actually, I was trying to think, who was I? I was talking to David Swerdlick.
Oh, I love David.
And he was singing your praises. So I was like, I need to have him on the podcast. I'm glad we could do this.
No, I am too. And thank you for reaching out. I have been a follower of yours I'm 29. So probably since I was like 22 for like a while, not to age.
I'm getting to the age where people could say, I've been listening to you since I was a kid. It's scary.
Yeah, right. Literally.
It's scary. I don't know if you know who.
But I've admired you. I guess is the premise of the point I'm trying to make.
No, I appreciate that. I remember back in the old days, in the mid 2000s, I used to go over to MSNBC they had Nebraska Avenue.
That's right.
And Channel 4 would record there. So local DC Channel 4. I'm from this media market, and so I would see like Jim Vance, and one time I ran into Doreen Gensler, who's beautiful, but I ran into her, and I'm like, I was more starstruck to see the local NBC people, but I said to her, like, I've been watching you since I was like a little kid. And then it hit me that was
a
horrible thing to say to a lady. And she's beautiful, of course, but that just did not come out right. So.
Well, and now it's your turn, Matt, to see life comes full circle.
Oh man, well, you know how cable news is. This is a joke in my speeches where I talk about how cable news, the age skews older, and so I know if a 70-year-old woman comes up to me at the airport and recognizes me, I know what she's gonna say. I don't watch your show, but my mom does. So it is what it is. Crazy times, man. Crazy times. I wanted to get your perspective, right? Because I know that you have worked in the past and for Republican administration, why don't you just
for the current administration? Actually, yeah.
Have you?
Although brief.
Tell us a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your background before we get into it.
Yeah, sure. So when I was a student at Morehouse in Atlanta, Georgia, same school as Dr. Martin Luther King, I started the first college Republican chapter there in the school's history, which did very well, got a lot of attention from me and opened up a lot of doors and opportunities. And so my senior year, I started working with the Gingrich campaign, and I was tasked with mobilizing college students to do a lot of GOTV, get out the vote efforts on behalf of the campaign, targeting, mobilizing.
Is this 2012?
2012, yep. And so obviously I want to say November, which would have been the first semester of my senior year, I kind of stepped back because I was trying to prepare to graduate, was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And so that was a great opportunity. And after finishing college, a good friend of mine who lives in Georgia, an African-American guy who's a Republican, said, hey, I have a lot of good friends on Romney's campaign, and they are looking for some diversity, and they really want to give opportunities to some up and rising African-American conservatives. I've recommended you. And so they reached out and said, hey, we want to fly you up to Boston. And so at that time, I flew up. They flew me up. I met Will Ritter, who was a longtime aide for Governor Romney, who became the director of operations on the campaign. He now runs Pool House with Tim O'Toole, who was the digital director for the Romney campaign. It's a political digital ad firm based in Richmond with offices across the country. And so he flew me out. I met with him. I also had the chance to meet with Stuart Stevens, who, if people aren't familiar, Stuart Stevens is a veteran of Republican campaigns from every single level. And they loved me and said, hey, we'd like to bring you on and give you this opportunity. And I was excited and said, absolutely. It was at 21 years old, jumping on your second presidential campaign. It's just like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. And so I did that. And once that concluded at the end of 2012, I ended up going down to Miami in 2013. I did some work with some nonprofits down there. Then that took me back to Georgia, where I worked on a couple local campaigns. I ended up going back to Texas, where I'm from, and ran my very first campaign, which we actually won, which was pretty exciting. So I did that for a little bit, came to DC, sort of got my feel wet a little bit, trying to get involved with a couple different think tanks like Heritage and AEI. And so that was kind of a challenging moment a little bit. Spent a couple of months trying to do that. Ended up saying, okay, I don't know if I want to do politics. Literally, Matt, decided to fly to LA out of a whim, out of nowhere. It's like, oh, maybe I'll figure out what I want to do in LA. I ended up moving to LA, and I met Harvey Levin, the TMZ Harvey Levin. This is hilarious. So Harvey Levin at the time was working on a television show, and I can't remember the name of it. And I was being considered to be a potential co-host for this television show, man. This is just so crazy.
Wow.
And ultimately, after going a couple months and it didn't work out, Fox decided not to pick it up. I got a phone call from a friend of mine and said, hey, you should come back to DC. We could really use your help at America Rising, which is an opposition research firm that was started by Matt Rhodes, who was Mitt Romney's campaign manager in 2012. So you see how everything sort of comes back to where you begin, if you will. And so I said, absolutely, I'd love the opportunity. And so I ended up moving to Virginia. They hired me to be an opposition researcher. I did a lot of field stuff for the state of Virginia. And then occasionally they'd have me fly to other places and do some oppo stuff because I had the ability to sort of get into places that other people could not get into just by virtue of being African American, just to be blunt. And so that was an interesting experience. I did that for all of 2014, which is when Republicans had that big win. If you remember, we did exceptionally well in the House. I think we had the largest victory in 90 years, I believe.
Was that the point when Republicans had more Republican office holders than ever?
Yeah, ever. I mean, it was impressive. And so I enjoyed that run. And so that brings me to 2014. And then in 2015, Dr. Carson decided he was going to run for president. And a buddy of mine, Gianno Caldwell, African-American guy who I worked with on the Romney campaign, there wasn't a lot of us. So the few of us, we sort of befriended one another. And so we stayed in touch over the years. And he introduced me to one of Dr. Carson's long-term advisors, Armstrong Williams, who has since become a mentor of mine. And he said, look,
I used to listen to this will go back to where we started. I used to listen to his radio show when I was it was called The Right Side. And it was on WAVA, WAVA, the Christian station here in D.C., in the D.C. area.
The Right Side with Armstrong Williams. That's right, man. God. And so I met with him, and he looked at my resume, and he, called some of my folks that I had worked under on previous campaigns, and they all spoke highly of me, even going all the way back to when I was in college, and I did some stuff with Bob McDonnell's campaign in Virginia when the National College Republican Association mobilized a lot of the Republican leaders to come and assist in Virginia at the time. He said, your resume is impressive. Everyone speaks highly of you. We'd like to bring you on. So I ended up going to Carson's, what would become the campaign headquarters. And I met with a guy named Ed Brookover, who was senior strategist of the campaign at the time. And he said, look, your resume is impressive. I've talked to some folks that I know over the years who've worked with you. They say you're definitely bright. You're going places. So we'd like to bring you on as a coalitions advisor because you have a knack for building bridges, if you will, with disparate coalitions. And obviously that's important in campaigns, and for your audience sake, it's important to build coalitions because it's the leaders of those coalitions that sort of create the inroads to various groups of people. So for example, you'll build coalitions to pastors. Why? Because pastors create an inroad to the evangelical community, their parishioners. You will build a coalition with African-American leaders because it builds an inroad into the African-American community and vice versa. And so I was tasked with that job on the Carson campaign. And so I worked with several other individuals to really craft a strategy to target and mobilize evangelicals through an overall coalition strategy. That was my primary focus on the campaign. And that was a critical demo group for Dr. Carson because the evangelicals loved him. And so that was an amazing opportunity for me. He obviously did not win. He dropped out of the race. I became his communications director. He then decided to endorse then candidate Trump, now President Trump. And so I traveled with him as he would go and do those various political opportunities, if you will, speaking on behalf of the then candidate. And ultimately, when he was asked to join the cabinet as HUD secretary, I obviously naturally went with my principal, of course, and helped him through the transition process and was sworn in as the youngest deputy chief of staff at HUD. Wow. That lasted for 2 months. Then they found this article I wrote criticizing then candidate Trump, which I was it's so funny because I was pretty transparent about that in the beginning, but you know how politics works. And
Yeah.
they said, yeah, you know, the president said you got to go. So you got to go. And that brings me to where we are now.
Oh, the great coalition builder, Donald Trump. It's a great outreach program to run off
Right.
African-American Republicans. Well, I mean, that's a good segue into how are you navigating, you know, the different hats that you wear, including, I mean, a lot of us have gone through this, just people who are conservatives. Now with Trump saying and doing things that I could just speak for myself that I find very, you know, discordant and troubling. Are you still like a Trump? Would you consider yourself still a Trump supporter at this point, or where are you?
Well, I mean, I was never, you know, it's an interesting question. People ask me this question and they just naturally assume, which is a safe presumption, I would argue, for a logical person to make that, well, if you worked for the administration, you must have supported the president. And I would say that was never the case for me. When Dr. Carson decided to go into HUD, which actually was never a part of the plan for him to even endorse anyone, but that's a whole nother conversation. When he decided to go in, his sort of kitchen cabinet advisor said, you know, we need someone to go in with Doc to protect Doc, to have his best interests, because he's not a politician. This is something that's going to be very, very new for him. You're smart, you're young, you have a command of certain things. You can sort of help guide and protect him, which is necessary for someone who's going into something new. And so that was sort of the thought process behind me going in with him. And I got to tell you, Matt, it took a good month or two to convince me to like, hey, you need to go in and make sure Doc is okay, before I finally said okay. And even then I talked to my parents about it, talked to my grandparents about it. I was like, look, I don't want to go in and work for Trump. I just never had an interest. And I'll put it this way. My mom ultimately said, hey, you know, we're not big Carson fans, but Dr. Carson has been very good to you. He's opened up a lot of doors for you. He's given you a lot of amazing opportunities. If he needs you, you need to go and you stand by him during his time of need. It's just a loyalty thing. You do good to those who have been so good to you. And so I said, okay, this makes sense. And I thought about it and I said, you know, HUD's a great agency. Housing is a critical issue, particularly for a lot of African Americans, and not just African Americans, but poor Americans in general, just giving them opportunity and access to reasonably priced housing, safe housing. And so I started thinking about the big picture, which was like, man, I can do a lot of incredible things here for a lot of different people. And so that was sort of a part of the mechanism, the thought process, if you will, that I went through to ultimately say, okay, I'm going to do this. So I wasn't a supporter. I just did a job for someone who I deeply cared about and had so much respect for, and someone who just took me as a young African-American Republican, really trying to get my feet wet in politics as a strategist, and said, I'm going to give you this incredible opportunity as a coalitions advisor, which is a significant role, and we're going to see what you can do and prove yourself. And that's an opportunity that I'm not certain, Matt, that others would have given a 26-year-old at the time. And so I sort of felt a sense of allegiance to having to go in and sort of serve with him. And just, again, make sure that he was okay, make sure that he got through the process as unscathed as possible, if you will. Yeah. And that was always my focus. And so when I look at the president and his behavior and characteristics and some of the things he's doing that I don't particularly care for, I can't say that I'm surprised. I mean, the article that I wrote that ultimately got me fired, I sort of alluded to some of the things that I thought would potentially become problematic. And I would say if I had $1 million, or if I had $1 for how accurate I was, it would be $1 million by now, I should say. And so that's sort of my position, if you will, on where I stand as it pertains to the president.
Now, obviously, I'm talking to you. The context is, I mean, there are protests and riots and civil unrest. I think most of us were pretty outraged and disgusted by the atrocity, police abuse. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, and then how you think Trump has handled that, because part of it is a problem that Trump inherited, and then part of it is I think he maybe exacerbates the problem, or at the very least is unable to bring us together.
Sure. I mean, look, Matt, I'm an African American male. I mean, these kinds of things do concern me. And I was just telling someone yesterday when I was doing an interview for something else, I was interviewing a Black mother for a series that I'm putting together. And I was talking to her son who just turned 18, and we were talking about being pulled over by the police. And I was sharing with him the first time I was ever pulled over. I was still in high school. I think I was like 17, and I was driving at the time. And after that experience, I didn't drive for months. I mean, the whole experience it bothered me, disturbed me so much. It took literally months for me to drive again, just because the officer was kind of rude, just kind of a nasty guy. And so just the experience within itself, I just felt like I don't want to go through this again. This is not worth driving. I'll just have my parents drop me off where I want to go. And so I was sharing that experience with him and just sort of giving him some tidbits, if you will, on what to avoid if you deal with an officer like that, because I just didn't expect it. And I think me not expecting it led to me being very annoyed with that officer. It just made the overall experience just so horrible. My parents had to end up coming to rectify the situation, coming to me to stop. I was like, oh, can I call my parents? At least he was decent enough to allow me to do that. And then after that, I just said, yeah, I didn't want to drive anymore. So when I see these instances, such as what happened to George Floyd, it's like this prevailing thing within our culture as it pertains to policing and African Americans, particularly African American men. And that prevailing thing is that there is an overuse of force, if you will, that's not typically necessary in many of the situations. Now, I'm not saying that police officers should not have the ability to use reasonable force when necessary. I have family members that are in law enforcement. My uncle's a deputy sheriff. I certainly want them to maintain that ability when the situation warrants it. But when it's very clear, it's very obvious that the situation does not warrant it, I don't understand how any person can justify such acts and such actions. And so when you see these types of instances occur over and over and over again, you can't help but wonder, if I'm ever in a situation like this when I'm dealing with a law enforcement, while most are good, what if I just get the one guy who's having a bad day, or may have some type of prejudice, or may view me differently? And what if that escalates so much where I end up losing my life, or end up being really bruised and battered unrecognizably? I mean, you think about these things, man, and it's almost like this constant fear.
And this comes on the heels of the jogger who was killed in Georgia.
Ahmaud Arbery. Yep. And so I don't know if people recognize just how infuriating it is. And I was talking to an older African American friend of mine who works in a television business in New York, and we were talking about police. And she was sharing with me how her son, who is about 10 years older than me, I'm 29, so he's about 39, how every time he sees a police officer and the officer's behind him, he will either get off an exit or he will just immediately pull over, because he just doesn't even feel comfortable with a police officer behind his car. Now, just imagine having that type of anxiety in a country that is your native land. I mean, that level of absurdity to me is just something that I don't think even the most candid person, or casual spectator rather, of politics, who's not that into what's going on, could even say, okay, there's something wrong with this situation. I may not be following it all, but I know this just isn't right. And so my hope is that this moment that we're in now, the protesting that is peaceful, not the looting, not the destruction, because I do not approve of that at all. I think it takes away from the overall message. I think it takes away from a legitimate grievance that calls us all to be a lot better than we currently are. My hope is that people finally take the opportunity to listen. And the outcry is not that anyone is asking for anything different or more. People are merely asking for equity. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. I don't think it's unreasonable to say I should be treated exactly as you are treated. Not better, just the same. If you can give me that bare minimum, I'll be satisfied with that. And I think that's fair, because when you see these instances where there are white Americans and their interactions with police, even in the most insane situations where you see people with knives, with guns, a lot of the times the perpetrator leaves alive. But if it's African American, that's not always the case. And I'm not saying every single time, but a lot of the times it's not the case. And it's enough for people to start saying,
Yeah.
we're not
And
going to
think
take
about
this
some of the
anymore.
people who've been killed, selling loose cigarettes,
Eric
potentially
Gardner,
using a for a $20 bill that was, bogus. I mean,
allegedly, we don't even know
we
yet.
don't even know. But like, let's say it was real. Like, does the punishment fit the crime?
Of course not. I mean, the means doesn't justify the end, and that's why I said early on. That's why I stated I don't want to take away law enforcement officers' ability to use reasonable force when commensurate with the situation. Matt, when someone's selling loose cigarettes, man, write him a damn citation and go move on. Guys trying to sell $20, why are you doing this? Okay, like, come on, man. You know you can't do this. Cut the crap out. We got to give you a fine. Go on about your business. Now, if the person decides to get rowdy and crazy, then obviously you got to arrest them. But in the case of George Floyd, he wasn't resisting, at least not from the videos I've seen.
We haven't seen video. We've seen a lot of videos, but we haven't seen that. Right. And I assume that video would have surfaced by now. If
of course it would have surfaced by now. And so, again, Matt, you have these instances where people see an overuse of force and they just say, how in the world can we continue to justify this? The reality is we just cannot. Now, to answer your question, the second part of your question about the president and his response or lack thereof, if you really want to test a person's ability to lead right, put them in the toughest situation they can possibly handle, and you will see a person's true colors. Not when everything's going smooth, not when it's easy sailing, not when they can sort of dictate and command things to go just as they would imagine, but put them in a situation where they don't know what the next day is going to bring, let alone the next hour. And I think, unfortunately, you see the president in this situation right now, in this predicament right now, and he doesn't know what to do. And so what he does is he relies on his natural instincts, which I would argue, and some people may disagree, but what I would argue is to sort of incite discord, which is the exact opposite thing you want to do, particularly when there's a racial grievance at stake. And I think more than ever, what we need is a president that's empathetic, a president who can call to bring the country together and unify people despite ethnic differences. Yeah. That's what we need more than anything else. And to your point, this has existed far beyond President Trump. And I got a feeling it's going to exist well after he's gone. I don't even think you can police racism or bigotry. I don't think you can. I don't think there's any government federal fix that can fix that. That's a people's problem, Matt. Now, we can try to encourage the best out of people, and we can put in place policies that we hope brings out the best in people and encourage people to cross bridges with different ethnicities. But I don't think you can police this, man. This is something that's deeply rooted in some people's soul and who they are. But when we see it, the expectation, again, that I would argue is that you have a president who's not talking about putting dogs on people or shooting people. You have a president that will say, look, the looting, the rioting, we are going to stop that because we can't permit that. But for the overwhelming majority of people who are protesting, I am your president and I stand with you because I know this is wrong. And we haven't seen that, and we desperately need it.
Yeah, imagine if Marco Rubio had won, what would he have said? Mm-hmm. The rhetoric would have probably been a lot different.
Right.
Or Nikki Haley. I mean, I'm not a fan of Nikki Haley or Marco Rubio anymore, but I used to be. And Nikki Haley of 2016 would have spoken, I think, better than Trump. Mm-hmm. I do think, this qualified immunity seems to me to be a big answer, though. I mean, a policy won't solve racism, but if a cop does something like this and we get them on tape, we need to be, and then they're convicted, at least then the community can say, okay, that was horrible, but there's justice. Mm-hmm. But if the police skate on something like this, as they often do, then the community has no reason to believe that there's going to be justice. And so I think that frustration spills over into the streets.
Which is what we're seeing. I mean, the idea of justice becomes moot. The idea of this system, this apparatus that is supposed to be blind, that is supposed to not see differences among people from race, economics, etc. It becomes nothing more than an idealistic theory that is untangible. That's a problem. That's when things boil. That's when things erupt. You cannot say, and it surprises me that conservatives aren't more vocal about this, that you have an entity of the state with so much power that they don't have to be transparent. They can run reckless. They can trample over individual civil liberties and rights. You would think, Matt, as conservatives, we would say, hell no, this is not okay. It's not consistent with our contextual philosophical beliefs.
Well, remember when they were
conservative thinker.
When they were telling us we had to stay home and we couldn't go out and get haircuts, we were protesting. Right? But I mean, sadly, I have to tell you, man, and I'm a huge fan of Reagan and Kemp, and I grew up a conservative, and I'm still a big fan of Reagan. But I think there's a lot more, I'll call it the right. There are a lot more racists on the right than I thought. And I think that we've gotten to this point where it's tribalism. We don't want big government telling us what to do when it's us. If it's a black guy, well, that's a different tribe. And so I think that Republicans and conservatives, too many of them are willing to tolerate big government using its authority when it's aimed at folks that aren't always look like the stereotypical Republican.
Well, it's interesting when you think about racism and prevailing racism, and you think about the Republican Party. One of my biggest concerns has been for quite some time now that the Republican Party has sort of fallen into this collectivist mentality. Think about collectivism in a philosophical sense. And that is to say that everyone must automatically share the same group think of what's only in the interest of a certain group, and any other group, regardless of race, regardless of any of the variables we like to categorize people, they're all insignificant. And so that is to say, to your point, even when the vast majority of Republicans know what they see as wrong, know what they hear is wrong, they won't say anything. We're going into the whole notion of tribalism. That's fundamentally problematic, Matt. And one of my biggest concerns is as the country's demographics change, as we see these demographic shifts, what does that mean for the Republican Party of the future? What does that mean 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, as we look at demography and we look at the electoral maps drastically changing in ways that are so unprecedented from what we've seen 30, 40, 50 years ago? I can only presume that some of these problems that we are witnessing today are only going to become worse if we don't have the right people in office, the right leaders trying to bring people together. And it just doesn't seem that leadership exists. There's this vacuum, Matt, and I feel like there's a growing, at least I believe this, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's my youthfulness and my naivete, but I want to believe that there is still a significant percent of Americans of all creeds who still want and believe in the promise of America. But where are the leaders who are guiding us towards that promise? Who are saying we're not perfect, we have a shitload of flaws. I hope I can say this on your podcast. We're going to acknowledge those flaws. We're going to recognize them. We're going to do everything we can to correct them, and we're going to move forward as a collective. No one's doing that, man. And when I grew up, that's what my grandparents taught me. You're going to lead, bring people together, bring out the best of them, give them something to aspire to be. We don't see that today, Matt.
I love this is the values that I grew up with, and reading leadership books about, and studying great coaches and whatever. And I wanted to ask you, I mean, I've mentioned how I've been disappointed in people like Marco Rubio and Nikki Haley for basically enabling Trump, right?
Right.
I was a big fan of Newt. I've always thought he was, eccentric, and he had the knock on Newt. 10 ideas a day. One of them is brilliant. None of them are insane. I mean, I always knew about Newt's problems, but I admired the heck out of his intellect and his creativity. And he's just an interesting guy. And Dr. Carson, obviously, at one point was a hero, not just in the African-American community, but I mean, there was like a movie about him, right?
Right. That's right. Yeah, Gifted Hands.
and a great memoir about sort of book
Mm-hmm.
and this is someone I gotta say I have a personal friend who was basically dying of cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and Dr. Carson got him hooked up with the doctor at Johns Hopkins, and all of a sudden he got in and now probably saved his life.
Wow.
Thanks to Dr. Carson. So,
Mm-hmm.
say what you will about him, brilliant guy, and I think he has a good heart. Are you I guess two questions. What were
Sure.
they like to the degree that you got to know them personally? What were they like?
Mm-hmm.
And are you a little bit disappointed to the extent
Mm-hmm.
that they are helping serve this Trump
Sure.
administration? You know, I don't feel like Dr. Carson has actually become that embroiled in Trump's sins, but he
Mm-hmm.
is working for him. Like, does that bother you?
Sure. So, to answer your question, so when I worked on the Gingrich campaign, I spent a little time here and there around the speaker, because I was still a college student, so obviously I didn't get the opportunity to say, hey, this is what I think. I could tell the people who are my bosses, this is what I think, and I just got to sit, in a room and just sort of listen and observe. And I had a few times that I got to interact with him, but the times I did, I just thought he was one of the most brilliant people I had ever met. And I even remember at the time I was telling one of my college professors, I just said, God, this guy is just brilliant. I mean, even if you don't agree with some of his positions or even some of his ideas about how to do things, you can tell this is someone who thinks about things both big and small.
Yeah.
And for me, as a college student who was studying political theory, just thinking about complex things in general, for me, it was just like fun. How do we figure out these complicated things? That's just a fun thing to me. And to me, he seemed like such a person. Am I disappointed? I guess I kind of am. And I'll get to Carson next. I mean, again, I think of Newt Gingrich as an intellectual. And as thinking of one as an intellectual, I think of intellectuals as being objective. I think of them as being methodical. I think of them of thinking about the past and how the past sort of dictates our present, and how what we do in the present will dictate the tomorrow. That's how I think about intellectual people, because of how they process things. And so in saying that, when you think about an individual like that, and you think about the particular moment in time that we're in now, because life is nothing more than a collection of moments in time, you can't help but say, how in the world can you be okay with this? So of course I'm disappointed. I still respect him, but I'm disappointed. Now with Dr. Carson, I got to build an incredible relationship with him and his family. And that is just one that as I stated, he wasn't supposed to go in. That was never the plan.
Right.
The plan was he was going to get out. We were working on a new entity that was titled the Carson Ideas Forum. And it was sort of going to be this sort of an intellectual brainchild kind of thing, just focus on the issues he cared about. And he decided otherwise. Was I happy? No, man. I'm going to be honest, I wasn't. I love that guy. He's an amazing man, brilliant man, a decent human being. There are so many stories about him and his family that I could tell that would blow people away that they probably don't even know exist. And when you build that type of a rapport with someone, that type of respect for someone, you at a certain point, Matt, you give up on trying to understand the why. I'm just being as candid as I possibly can. I don't know. I know that he wants to do good things. I know that. But then I have to pause and ask myself, but is this the best way to do those good things? Does this mean justify the end? I don't know.
I feel like if Dr. Carson had stayed away from partisan politics, that he could have been celebrated by mainstream culture, by the mainstream media, by Hollywood, and he could have basically normalized being conservative and being pro-life and made it a respectable, acceptable thing without introducing like the toxicity of partisanship. Like it would have been a more subtle, sneaky way of advancing a pro-life, cause while he was still celebrated. But I feel a little sad because fair or not, I think his legacy is going to be tarnished
No, it is.
because of
I mean,
politics.
it is, and that's something that's just not even as a lover of politics, but just as an African American who, growing up as a child, Dr. Carson was just like really one of the only few living legends outside of maybe someone like a John Lewis and a few of the other civil rights icons that worked directly with Dr. King that was still alive. Dr. Carson was like, if this is the guy who came from nothing, who really showed if you use your intelligence, if you work your butt off, you can accomplish some insurmountable things. He was the example of that. And now to see African Americans who once praised him look at him in a different light, that's kind of hurtful, man. I mean, the guy was like, he was like everything. He literally was like everything to so many people. And to see that change it sucks. It's hurtful. It sucks, and it makes you dislike politics, and it just makes you think, well, maybe you could have said some other things to say, well, maybe we should have thought about this before you do this. And you just start thinking about a million and one things about, well, what if? And maybe we could have gone in a different direction. But that's just not the reality, man. And so you just find yourself reassessing and living in the now, and just thinking, going forward, if I am in another situation where I'm advising a principal such as him, what do you do to avoid those types of pitfalls and mistakes? And again, I don't think I don't think most people are beyond redemption. I don't think. But redeeming value is something that a person has to want. You can't force it, can't dictate it. That person has to want it. And you can only hope that after an individual goes through an experience, whatever their reasons were for wanting to get involved and do it, you just only hope that as they move to the next chapter or the final chapter at his age, and they look over their entire life and they look at that one particular moment, that they do everything they possibly can to say, yes, this moment existed. I know it made a lot of people uncomfortable and unhappy, but I really want to focus on all of my life, if you will, and the amazing things, the good deeds. And let's focus on those things to encourage people to be models of myself, if you will, right? And so that's my hope. But like I said, it sucks. It definitely sucks, man. And I don't know any other way to describe how I feel about that, as far as my disappointment or the emotions I feel when I think about all the possibilities that I was excited about by working with him and seeing him work with someone like Trump. Again, people voted for him. I respect their right to vote for him. I respect people's right to share his beliefs. This is America. But just knowing Dr. Carson, a man of amazing faith, and knowing how he views the world and how he views people, they're not consistent, at least from my perspective, from my experiences with him, with the president.
I know you have a heart out, so we only have like 2 minutes.
Okay.
So I got 2 questions. We'll have to go lightning round. What'd you think? Were you offended by the Joe Biden's "You ain't black" line?
I thought it was ridiculous. I mean, I kind of knew what he meant, which is, most black people vote for Democrats. And it's like, if you guys dislike Trump so much, why in the hell would you not vote for the alternative? I got it. I just
We're giving him a hard time. I mean, they're if Trump's so bad. Yeah.
Right. I just don't know if those were the best words, man. I mean, look, Matt, we're living in a PC world, man, where everybody's offended by every darn thing. And I tell my friends all the time, they laugh because it's just like, you're so old school. I'm like, just give it to me straight. Whether it pisses me off or offends me, give it to me straight. Don't coddle me. Don't try to make me feel good like I'm a baby. Just speak directly, man. And I think the issue, mostly with my generation and millennials and Gen Zers, is that we want every damn thing baby fed to us, Matt. We got to get over that crap, man. That's not how life works. Life is hard, okay? And no one's gonna hand walk you through everything. And I think we're like raising a society of babies. That's not good, Matt. Just being honest, man. Maybe I'm like an old soul in a young body, but that's just not the mentality I have. I think he should have chose better words. And was it something to like end the world over? Man, no, absolutely not.
All right. Last question is, how can people follow you on Twitter and keep up with you?
Yeah, so follow me on Twitter at Shermichael_. And so I do a lot of my columns for the Washington Examiner And I'm working on some new projects with Sinclair Broadcast Group, Matt. Hopefully I'll be launching a new show. It was supposed to launch in March, and COVID-19 sort of screwed that up. And so it'll be a DC-based show that's going to air on ABC7, but we're also going to repopulate a lot of the segments via social media, so people will hopefully be able to see them soon. Obviously, again, it depends on reopening, when we can go into the studio and all of that sort of stuff. So that's one new project that I'm currently working on. And then people can see me pretty regularly on MSNBC. Usually I'm on every week. That has dried out as well because of COVID-19, Matt. So I'm just like, my whole life, man, has just been like, I think my life, along with yours and everybody else's, has been put on pause. But obviously, we want people to be safe. We want people to be healthy. But as you and I were talking before we started recording, at some point we got to start reopening things safely, of course. But we got to, productivity has to increase again. Too many people are being decimated by this, Matt, and the financial and economic toll this is going to have, particularly on communities of color, poor white communities, is going to be devastating. You're talking about generational impacts here. And so from my thought process is on this, reopen, figure out a way to do it safely, figure out a way to decrease the spread, decrease the number of people dying, but you got to get people back out there working again, because at some point this is going to become so difficult that I don't think there are going to be any further or additional economic steps that we can put in place to assist people with just surviving, man. And that's not a good thing.
Well, it's been a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Matt.
Shermichael Singleton, thanks for coming on the news.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, man.
Matt, that was fun, man. So this is going to be like on like iTunes and everything?
Yeah, I'm going to put it up. It'll go on YouTube. I don't have many viewers,
nice.
But it'll mainly,
man,
most
I
people.
I should have got a better background. Why you didn't tell me you were going to put a video up?
Most people will listen to it. Not many people watch my videos. It's mostly people who listen to the podcast on iTunes. So.
Well, if you share the podcast on Twitter or with me, I'll put it out.
I appreciate it.
Man, I would have went home where I have my grand piano as my backdrop.
Well, then we just have to do it again then.
Okay, fair enough. So you have to invite me back after COVID-19.
You got it, man.
Talk about political stuff. Is that a deal?
Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. You're New York based, right?
No, I'm actually in West Virginia right now, but I'm mostly DC based. Yeah.
Oh man, so when things open up, you got to let me know when you're back in the area.
Yeah.
I'd love to, have lunch or dinner with you.
That'd be awesome, man.
Okay, cool. Well, hey Matt, thanks for the opportunity. It's so funny that I get the chance to do these types of things. As I joke with my parents about this all the time. So many of people like you or folks, when I was at Morehouse, being a Black Republican is like this college that MLK graduated from. It's like a misnomer, man. It's like, you're a Black Republican. What are you talking about? And so you only have so many people who were intellectuals or great writers to sort of follow. And I told Bill Crystal this when I first met him. I told George Will this when I first met him the first time, that you guys were like really the people who helped me get through my 4 years at Morehouse, because I really didn't have anyone else to sort of read or follow.
Yeah.
So it's just to sort of develop my own ideas of what it means to be a conservative. So I appreciate you for that, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah,
well, I appreciate it.
Brother.
Let's hang out as soon as the coast is clear.
All right, I'm holding you to it, man.
All right, man.
Thanks, man. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.